I want to share this image of my great aunt, Lee Hee-ho, when she married Kim Dae-jung, who eventually became president of South Korea in the late 90s. And next to her seated, so to the right, this is my grandfather, and he was her eldest brother. And he also, among many other things, he was actually stripped from his position at one of the first stock companies in Korea because of his association with her and with Kim Dae-jung because he's part of the resistance party. And so Kim Dae-jung was in jail for a long time. She was under house arrest for a long time. And then everyone in their families were kind of persecuted in this way. But he was actually a wonderful hobby photographer. And I feel like that's part of how this idea of learning to frame your world. And so this is one of his photographs of my father and myself, and my younger sister in New York. We were born in Flushing, New York City, and my parents were immigrants. They met each other in New York City. And this is the scroll for naming me. So in Korea, they wait till the baby is born so that they can, based on the time and the date and the location, decide on the best name, and then write out this long fortune for you. But this is really just to kind of introduce this obsession I've always had with writing and text and words. Um, and then the other thing that was really important to me growing up was music. So this was in high school. I was concert master of the orchestra. I thought it was a real big shot. And then I chose Oberlin because I thought I could maybe my teacher said, just get into the college and then wait a year, just practice hard and then apply and then audition for the con. And as soon as I got here, I realized this is like really serious big leagues and I don't want to practice 8 hours a day. So I am just gonna, but I continued I had private lessons. I was in the orchestras. I had a string quartet. Actually, the person behind me, Gita Ong, was a dear friend from third grade who also went to Oberlin with me and sadly passed away when she was not even 25. I was my first year of grad school. And so then I landed Oberlin. I realized I'm not going to be a musician. And I decided to become an art major. And because I was so indecisive. And I decided to do this visual art major where I just had to take 4 art history and 4 studio art classes. And so as a requirement on a 200 level art history class, we were studying Chinese landscape paintings with the great Robert Harris, who eventually went on to Columbia University. I was completely bored and I was sleeping through most of these classes. The slideshows, I remember almost nothing. But we went to the museum one day to look at new scrolls at the time. They were new acquisitions, even though to me they looked quite old. And so I was the curator at the time, Charles Mason, was unrolling one and said, well, this one happens to be on Korean paper because the Chinese painters sometimes preferred Korean paper. And that was the one very memorable like light bulb moment where like my entire head filled with light. And I just thought, why am I studying Chinese art if I don't know anything about Korean art? And how will I learn anything about Korean art if I've rejected my Korean language and my heritage? Because at that time, it was very uncool to be Korean, which I know seems shocking now, but and I had grown up with Korean as my first language, but once I started school at 4, it all switched to English, even though my parents spoke it to us. My father was very good about actually making us read and write to him, like read on a certain level. But and that was when I decided to go back to Korea to regain my language. So Kevin was so kind and let me look at this scroll today. And so I haven't seen it since 1997. And it's really much better than this. So I really advise that anytime you can, make an appointment to see it. It's gold. It's not like whatever this looks like, but and that's what I remembered about it. So that was me at my aunt's and uncle's house in Seoul. And I did a language program and I had a very awkward phone call with my parents. And I said in Korean, I'm only going to speak in Korean to you going forward. And they were like, please don't do this. You're not good at this. This is like not. But because I was 19 and I was 30 when I went on my Fulbright to Korea. And so I had that amount of practice. Not to say that, speaking Korean to your parents is enough, but it's better than nothing. So other things that affected me, I grew up in the northern suburbs of New York and along the Hudson River. And I feel like there was something about growing up next to moving water that really set me up for paper making. And when I started to make paper, which was not actually until graduate school, I just really fell in love with this process, this watery process, this repetitive process, this labor-intensive process. And then I would try to combine it with my performance work. So this was at the Chicago Cultural Center when I was doing a durational performance. I had a whole 14-foot train that I was dragging behind me, all made of paper made from abaca, which is a banana leaf, and doing these stories. I would ask people to write me about journeys, and then I would interpret it into music that I would improvise and try to fill this space that used to be the circulation room of the Chicago Public Library. And then for my MFA thesis, I made this 14-foot tower out of bricks, and it was paper bricks. It was meant to be a self-portrait. And when my dad didn't come, my mom and my sister came to Chicago, and my mom said to my sister, was she thinking about Cheomseongdae when she was making this? And I wasn't, but I looked it up immediately and I started to cry because I realized that there was this connection between this observatory, which is one of the only ones that is still left standing from this time in history. And it's because I had made an artist book my last year of Oberlin, where I was tracing my parents' journeys before they met, so when they were in Korea, and then after they met. And I had uncovered all these photos because this was the kind of thing that you would go to see when you were basically dragged as a child, because this is a national treasure. So like someone growing up in New York, we went on our day trips to Philly, you'd see the Liberty Bell, overnights to DC, you see all the monuments. So I even have a picture not just of my parents in their school uniforms in front of this, but of myself being dragged there as a teenager. And so there had been something embedded that somehow showed up again, kind of upside down, years later. And I knew I wanted to make some kind of connection between Korea and my art that wasn't related to my family. And that became through paper. And then you beat it, and these days they have these wonderful beating machines, but we just do it all by hand, and that works just as well. And then you have to add that fiber to water in a vat, agitate for half an hour, then add that mucilage, agitate for another half hour, and then you're ready to form sheets. Most people think this is paper making, all of the other stuff is also paper making. So this, you can see I just hold the screen to the frame with my thumbs. I could actually just not even touch it and stay on, unless, you know, I made big mistakes. But, so there's a front to back dip and side to side dips, and that creates multiple, like a grain direction that's not as dominant in one direction, but it does create this issue where the front edge that's going down is usually thicker than the back edge, because when you first do the front to back dip, all the slurry starts in the front and slides down, and there's less and less and less, so there's much thinner at the other end. So you have to make a second sheet, flip it 180 degrees, and then put that down, and then you put the thread, that thread that goes down just between every two sheets. There's a pot of hot water next to me so that the vat is ice cold. This was done always in slack season by farmers after the harvest of food crops, and the cold water made the mucilage work best, and also was best for the fibers and reduced any bacterial growth. So you can see front to back, and then side to side. And there's a lot of things you have to keep track of when you're doing this. And this kind of paper they would call sometimes unyanji or unsan paper, like yin yang theory, right? Like two parts making one whole. So you see that flip that I just did with the screen. And this video is available on YouTube, so you can always go back, and I have all my Hanji videos on my YouTube channel, so that if you need to research it, like later I learned from another teacher that my hand position was incorrect at the snapping, but so there are some errors in the book that I had to fix over time, but the part that I didn't shoot is pressing the paper, which is not that exciting. It's very slow press often overnight to push out any excess water, and then those threads you have to take out one by one, and then once you release one thread, the front edge of the sheet is, you can have it touch this rod and then pull it away evenly so that it doesn't tear. Behind me is a stainless steel steam-powered dryer. So it's very hot. The sheets go on one at a time. By the time the last sheet is down, the first sheet should be dry. So this is kind of a newer kind of thing. They used to just have to air dry and wait for things to dry. There are some people who think that drying on wood boards was more of a Japanese invention that was forced onto the Koreans, and that they used to maybe dry on walls and things like that. You would see a lot in Indian paper making, and probably actually in Chinese paper making, some Vietnamese paper making, which is all related. So you can see the steam is coming off that last sheet. The first one's dry. You check for any cold spots, and then it's ready to go. This last step, which is a hammering of the sheet so that you can reduce ink bleed, increase surface sheen, compact fibers, and just, it gives this is the kind of paper that the Chinese demanded of Korea at further tribute. You know, when Korea was fast state, they would say, please give us this many, you know, millions of sheets of paper that are white, so cleaned perfectly and hammered. So these are some of the people that I studied with, and this is over multiple visits. You know, I went, I think, 3 different times, twice on Fulbright and one on a John Anson Kittredge grant. Not all these people are alive today. So we've lost Chang Yong-hun, who was the father of my original Hanji teacher. And then Yu Bae-gun, who was the Hanji screen maker, passed away last year. But everyone else is still alive and working. And so I came home. I learned many, many other things, but I came home and I just wanted to share everything. And I heard about the Morgan Conservatory and that they had just planted this garden of paper mulberry trees that you would need to make Hanji. They had done it without thought of making Japanese style paper, but and we collaborated to build the first Korean paper making studio in North America. And so this was the big vat that we made for that. And then I also wrote a book about everything that I had learned. And I thought I would just go through a little quick. So this is a sutra that was found in a Buddhist stupa in the late 90s, I think it was 1967. And this was proof that the Koreans had this type of woodblock printing even earlier. This is even earlier than the previous oldest woodblock printings on paper in Japan. And so you can see how it's disintegrated somewhat. The silk wrapper was disintegrated pretty completely, but the paper was still intact. And this is why they like to say in Korea, silk lasts 500 years, but paper lasts 1,000. Flower Garland Sutra is in this specific one, they actually talk about how sutras were devotional objects that monks were commissioned to make. You'd have to make the paper, you'd have to dye it this beautiful indigo, you'd have to illuminate it with gold and silver, and it would be rich people, patrons, asking to do this so they would have good karma, essentially. But even in this, they say to do right by the sutra, you have to grow the trees this way and perfume them this way and prune them this way. Xylography was the original printing method that worked best for Korean type. And eventually they went on to metal movable type. And this, book culture obviously boomed after that. But so this is an example of, this is a national treasure in Korea, and it is the Goryeo Daejangyeong, which is the Korean version of the Buddhist sutras. And so the Tripitaka, which I don't think I'm saying that right, but it's Sanskrit. So I don't know Sanskrit. It means 3 baskets, and it's over 80,000 wood blocks with over, I don't know how many millions of characters. And they have no errors in these carved wood blocks. And the insane thing is that they had to do this twice. So they did it once, and then the Mongol invasion caused them all to be burned, and then they did it all over again. So it's very hard to get into this temple, but it's perfectly climate controlled because the monks built the architecture so that the dirt floors and the airflow and everything worked in such a way that when they originally tried to take it to a museum to set it under climate control, they started to decay, and they brought them all back to the original temple called Haeinsa. So metal movable type started in Korea, or at least the first, the oldest book that we have printed with metal movable type is Jikji. That's the short name for it, another Buddhist kind of work about the right way of living. And this is, you can see the date, this is earlier than Gutenberg. And so there's a big project right now called From Jikji to Gutenberg to try to find connections between the two. I personally think they were just done independently, but, and then so many other ways that paper culture flourished in Korea. So you can see the folding screens that were constructed, construction underneath would be a paper. These sewing boxes, this beautiful fan that's actually a map of Jeolla province, and then even furniture that's all, it's lacquered, twined paper. And then in things that you would think wouldn't have paper, this wedding gown that's in the collections, Cleveland Museum of Art, you can see all the places that you would have the most wear are covered in paper and switched out because this wedding gown is so elaborate and rich that the entire village would share it. So every time a woman got married, they would wear it, and then the next person. Head, anything for your head. So these kind of royal like crown type things with horsehair, but then also gilded paper, or talchum masks, which were part of a folk theater tradition that was actually kind of a way for the lower classes to make fun of the ruling classes. And then these hat boxes made with calligraphy practice paper that you just paste around a form to store your hat. And then all the way from head to toe. So these slippers that were made out of paper and became a real like kind of in vogue thing, to the point where people kept stealing so many books that the government was like, you need to stop, this is illegal, please stop doing it. Because it wasn't a time where you could go to the store and buy paper, that you just had to recycle whatever you could. And then even in war, like these are actually images of paper armor, which that back in the like bow and arrow days, not in the gun and bullet days, but and even the quiver for the arrows are woven out of paper. And then these beautiful maps that are all actually made on recycled paper. And if you ever go to the Maps division of the Library of Congress, you can see they've done great restorations on these. The sliding doors and windows that are very ubiquitous throughout Korea, you need paper for all of them. And every year you would change them out. So it was a huge source of income for people making paper and installing. The inside, like the floors were covered in the paper, the walls, the ceilings. And then when all of that changed and Korea switched over to Western architecture, that all went away. So then suddenly you have this precipitous drop in paper making. And then ritual religion. These are lanterns, just like a tiny number of them from Buddha's birthday in Chogyesa Temple, one of the biggest Buddhist temples in Seoul. So I just wanted to do kind of a comparative. So like the left, you see the paper mulberry trees in Korea. On the right, the first iteration of their kozo garden. Kozo means paper mulberry in Japanese. In Korean, it's tak. In Korea, this process of steaming, right, all of the shoots so that you can strip them. And in Cleveland, the Morgan does a kozo harvest every November, and you can go and help with that. I believe it's tomorrow, so you could go and help. And then bark scraping knives. And so I had one that a previous American researchers, Lynn Amley, had brought back from Korea. That's on the right side, the prototype in the middle, and then the final version on the left that had an American blacksmith put into production for us. And then on the top right are the scraping platforms with like leather. Essentially, we just used rubber after that. And I realized way after we made all of them that we didn't actually even need them, because this is all, they're elevated because Korea is a floor culture. You'd sit on the floor and scrape. And so you needed it elevated, but Americans just sit at a table. You can just do it right on a 2x4, which is what my students will do in January. So you can see scraping bark in Korea on the left, scraping bark in Morgan on the right, burning pepper plants for ash on the left in Korea on the right, working with wood ash that Ed Vermew donated from his wood burning stove to make pot ash, and then cooking outdoors in Korea on the left, cooking outdoors in Morgan on a gas range that we can roll outside on the right, picking bark, and then having these high school students from a school trip pick bark, beating fiber by hand. That's a classic. That you could just do that forever. And then the seeds, you remember for that hibiscus plant for the mucilage, we tried to grow those at the Morgan one year. And then it's kind of, it's a whole thing. So it's much easier to just use a polymer, and that's what we do. And they do that in Korea as well. There's a specific polymer that you can use. And then this is the screen that Dart Hunter brought back, who was an American researcher, went to Korea in 1933. He was actually from Chillicothe, Ohio, very wealthy newspaper family, back when newspapers made you wealthy. And this was the one part I couldn't replicate. And this was an old one, so they actually sewed it with horsehair. Later, they switched to silk threads, and now they just use like monofilament, essentially nylon. So that's what I did for my second Fulbright, was I couldn't convince the guy making the Hanji screens to teach me, partly because he was in dementia. And then his wife showed me the steps and just told me practice for 5 years. So instead, I found the national treasure for making bamboo blinds, which is the closest adjacent thing I could find. And he took me into the mountains to like cut down the bamboo and everything, to learn how to weave, even if it wasn't, I could kind of figure out the rest of the stuff. And then I studied also with another Hanji teacher, and there I would see burdock, and he taught me like when you harvest the burdock burrs so that you can actually use them to clean your screen. So these are like little scrubbies. And so traditional paper makers always grow these and dry them. So you can see the Korean paper making on the top, and then on the bottom, my kind of permutation of that here. Boarding paper, again, on wood boards when Dart Hunter was there, the black and white photo in Wonju, on those heated steel dryers. And then in Ohio, in my last studio that I left last year, but I had put laminate surfaces up on walls so we can just go right onto the walls. Again, this Dart Hunter noted that in 1933, he was there. Remember, this is Japanese occupation. His hosts were Japanese, and they took them. He was basically just told, like, okay, you know, these poor Korean people, and the paper's not very good. And he agreed the Japanese paper is the best. But he said it's very sad that this charming Korean paper is going to go away because they're being trained. These are Korean men being trained in the Japanese technique because it was more efficient. And so my goal has been to kind of reverse that, and not exactly reverse. I'm not forcing Japanese people to make Korean style paper, but so here's the lower photo. It's actually myself with a Korean adoptee from France, and then also teaching Americans on the right at Paper Book Intensive in Michigan, and setting up vats and really expanding capacity for this. And so then privately, once I wanted to run my own retreats, since 2022, I've been doing these very small group retreats that just naturally draw a lot of people from the Korean diaspora, which has been incredibly fulfilling. And so we're very fortunate that the library agreed to host the last one this summer at Oberlin College in the papermaking studio they built. So let's go into the art a little. So this is, you can see a gold crown from the Unified Shilla period. And I just loved all of these, this like the ornamentation, these jade kamas that they still don't understand the meaning of. And the way that they just kind of move and like, even when you go to the museums, like as you walk around, they will still be kind of fluttering. And so the piece on the right was one of my early pieces coming from my first trip from Korea, just the experience of being in such a mountainous place. Korea is over 70% mountains, and I didn't grow up in a place like that. So kind of replicating the jewels, but also the landscape all through paper. And then these are the very early dresses I was doing in 2012 at a residency in Santa Fe. And they were based on actually artifacts I'd seen from, I believe, Kyrgyzstan, present-day Kyrgyzstan, and this idea of gold ornamentation that the curators had no idea, they didn't know what it was for. And I love that idea of mystery, and that it's okay that we don't know everything. But this is a precursor to then the actual dresses I really got into making several years later. So one of the things I learned in Korea the first time was jumchi, which is a method of texturing and fusing paper. And so this is like a sheet of purple paper that I've basically taken down to lint and then created these patterns. And then my teacher said, you have to back it with interfacing, make a dress, and do all these other things. And so I did that, and then there were offcuts. So I made a child-size version, which is here in the museum, and then I had offcuts. And then I made a doll-size version, and there's still offcuts. So then you just kind of keep going. And I also thought, why just do Western patterns when I could go into inspirations from Korean fashion and Korean clothing? So these are based off of more Korean clothing. The one on the right is based off of chollik, which is actually has its roots in Mongolia when because it was easier to mount a horse and ride in a skirt like this, and then they would have removable sleeves that you could use as bandages, so that as you were hunting on horseback, if you were injured, you could just kind of bandage yourself and just keep going. And then the classic kind of hanbok look, and you can see I'm already piecing. I'm still always just recycling, piecing whatever I have. You don't ever throw away paper. It just kind of, any paper maker does this. We just have hordes and hordes. And so to prepare a body of work I did in 2023, this is Michelle Lee, who is a recent Oberlin graduate. She studied with me in the winter term 2020 and is now in Shanghai doing independent research on Chinese papermaking and paper cutting. But she helped me with making big sheets of bark lace, which is the same material, tak, that we use to make hanji. You cook it in the same way, but then instead of beating it, you start to spread it and you turn it into lace or into these grids that are based off of a hamate or a mata, which is from a Mesoamerican tradition. And it's basically just hammering bark and then waiting for it to dry and then peeling it off the surface. You can see I've cut it into pattern pieces for a dress. And then this is after it's gone through the printing press. This is a little tricky to understand, and I have not figured out a good way to explain it. But so on the printing press, this is an etching press. The bark goes down first. The paper goes down next. Then you have a plate that you've inked up and you have it upside down. You put it down on the paper and then you send it through the press. And what happens is the pressure underneath the plate of the bark will imprint itself basically on the paper and also onto the plate. So here you see the bark pieces on the press. And then you see on the left, the paper goes on top of that. Inked plate goes upside down on top of that. And then this is, I've taken the paper away, but or you can see on the bottom, the pressure print is the print you get from that. And then when you peel it away off the plate, that you still have another print on the plate. So then you can harvest that for a ghost print. And then here's, constructing garments. And I was making four of these big ones at once. And then this is just to show you, some of the color. This is not necessarily for these, but like this is an example of what I grow in my garden. So growing coreopsis, deadheading the flowers, and then cooking them. And then dyeing. On the right is kakishibu, which is Japanese persimmon dye, which is a little different from Korean persimmon dye, which is kammul, because the Japanese ferment and the Koreans use it fresh. And I studied with Yang Sunja in Jeju-do. And then also, I did also relief print, not just pressure print. So there's the bark that I ink, right, in a very traditional way. It's kind of very straightforward. There's the bark in the press, and the paper, takes the impression of that. And then I would use the dye, so pre-treat it or post, really. I could do it either way. But in this case, I did the dye first, then the printing over it, and then starting to figure out how to construct this. This is actually the back of the dress. You can't see it, but it's there. It looks like that. And then this is figuring out the front of the dress, all these pieces, and then kind of the piecing, and then after it's been sewn. And then this is the final front, final back. This is one of the pieces. What it really shows, you can see kind of the pressure print on the right and the ghost print on the left, right? It's the same pattern. It's two different prints harvested from the same kind of impression. So the left is at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and the right is the pressure print of the jacket. And then the skirt is the pressure print of another grid that I then turned inside out because the paper is so thin that you still get a pattern going through. And this is actually the third, that's a ghost print. And so these are all related. And then the first two were in the Cleveland Museum of Art last year. And it was such an honor to be in this Korean couture show because they were sandwiched right between Korean artifacts. And that's exactly how I work, as I look at these old things and then I figure out, I just get so much inspiration for them. So that for them to be hanging together was so gratifying. So I'm going to jump to books, which is actually how I got started in art. I took an artist books class here with Nanette Yanuzi, and she just blew open all these ideas of what a book is. This book is in the collection, I think, here at the art library, and it's mostly, I don't think it has any words, and it's just, it's very few words actually, but all paper, all handmade paper. This one is another one, and kind of talking about like the paper, I dried it on concrete to pick up that impression, and then this one is using that hammered bark as the covers, that dye, that kaki persimmon dye, for the pages, and then doing a lot of this embedding techniques, whether it's thread, whether it's woven pieces. This is woven paper, so paper that I've spun into thread and then woven on a loom, and then mark making and autobiography. And I won't get into what this is all about, but I would try to do this both with kind of pen, but then also with thread. So these are all embedded. And I made a lot of knitted books, and I was doing that before I studied Hanji, but then after that, used Hanji so much more in the work. And so these are examples of some of the knitted books. Oberlin has one. And then this one was where I was doing like I just love mashups. So this is, Oberlin also has this book, and Peculiar and Commonplace, and it's pretending to be a sewing manual, but it's not. But it has a dress in it. So this mashup of a dress and a book. And you can see again, those prints reappear in the books, all handmade paper. And then this is the inspiration for the book that's here. So these were lace sample books from Switzerland that I saw at a show in New York years ago. And I just loved the scale of them and the color of them. And I was thinking about, I've been thinking, this is this number 3 in a series, of why sample books can't also be works of art or artist books. And so what I would do is I would create a parallel narrative. So I would keep all the information about the sample, as well as like a narrative over that. And so I had to dye paper for this book. And so this is done on the left is pre-reduced, it's more closer to what like the Japanese indigo looks like. On the right is what the Nigerian indigo looks like in the Yoruba tradition, which I learned from Gasali Adeyemo. And then also even taking those spark grids and dyeing them in indigo, taking thread that's made from abaca, and then dyeing in indigo, netting it, and figuring out a way that could become part of the book. And then this prep for creating the covers, which were not actually dyed. I was using ground ink, so ink sticks, and then for the stripes, and then acrylic paint and methyl cellulose in many layers for the cover. And then just like little basic things like how do you know where to get the label on? And this might kind of cheat for registering the labels. Assembling this, so dosa dos, which Americans will just call do-si-do, but it means it's 2 books in one, right? So they share a cover. And so what you see here is just one of the books. And so I thought what I would do is show you, so this is the first book, right? It's called Bearing Witness. And the words here on the bark are order, regulation, freedom, restraint. And the tag then, what is going on here? Experimentation, risk, plunging into mystery, finding a way through. Interstices, space, breath, calm. We describe and name to acknowledge and remember their presence in and of the world. To book 2, you can replenish yourself. This is a specific seduction. So you see this netting return. This is where the netting ended up. Simple yet mesmerizing. And so what's happening is you see the tags of the text I'm reading you, but what I'm not reading you is actually the information of what exactly the paper, how it's been made and what it's been made out of and how it's been treated. You can hold tight to faith while also letting go. It could have been total ruin, but you double down and dive in repeatedly. Turning away from what feels artificially urgent, a calm descends as you walk towards the woods. The trace of that image finally comes into focus years later. You sink more deeply into layers of yourself. Walk into your own dark and unruly spaces. Sit with yourself. It's messy. Sit, breathe, fill the spaces inside with one deep breath, then another and another. You soften when you accompany yourself, then return to us a bit more spacious, ready for the collective chaos. Every time you return to yourself, you can recreate a whole world. And this was made this was made at the end of 2024, so after a very difficult election. And just that, the narrative is so much about making and this happens in a lot of my books, about the book itself, about the making of the book itself, but also about the process of person going through that. There's a lot of autobiography that goes into it. So speaking of recreating whole worlds, I wanted to show you what I'm very proud of, this group effort that we've done here at Hales Gymnasium. 2013, this is what the papermaking studio space looked like. Ed Vermew found this space and thought, well, could we use it? Could we please ask the custodial staff to store this stuff elsewhere? And now it's a fully functioning paper studio. So we started in 2014 with the winter term class, and John Elder, pictured here, who's here tonight, was one of the first students. And we had very little, and what we did is we rented it all from the Morgan, and we threw it into this van, and the students had to unload it, set up a paper studio, work with it, reload it, and then it would be driven away. After a few years of doing this, got really tired, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And luckily, the prior library director said, let's just make you a paper studio. So now this is 2024 winter term, 2025 winter term, where you see a new Raina beater, which is a really big deal. Thank you to Valerie and Ed for making this happen. And the students making paper. This was, and then opening it up not just to students, but this was last year's commencement and reunion weekend, alumni coming back and people in the community making paper, using it for faculty development. On the left is Yoon, who is a new history professor and has also done a lot of research on Chinese papermaking. And at the right, Taylor Allen, who has built his own papermaking studio and also took my class during winter term, who is a biology professor, and more friends doing essentially pulping old turtlenecks of the late wonderful Alison Ricker and making them into paper. And then everywhere I go, I try to sneak Hanji into the back door. So in the summer, transforming into a Hanji studio. So these are kind of the prongs of the things that I find most important to my work, this direct study, this research, scholarship, and teaching. And I think of it all as a piece of my art. So it's very hard to divorce it. I would never be able to do one without the other. So this is the new book, and it was actually inspired by my research in Korea, but it was all about European papermaking tool makers. So you can see more of that on the front table. But otherwise, that is it. Thank you so much. And questions? Is that what, yeah? Any questions?
So you mentioned beating the Hanji paper so that it would better accept ink. Why is that? What's
Oh, the hammering it. It just compacts. It's almost like calendaring actually, like for West, like European style and Western papers. Sometimes you want to send it through like a lot of pressure. You're putting a lot of pressure on it. Because it's encouraging the fibers to kind of it's like encouraging more mechanical bonding between the fibers beyond the hydrogen and chemical bonding that's happened when it was wet. But it also imparts like a nice sheen and strength. So yeah, that's yeah. And there are other ways that people have done that too, like burnishing. Mhm.
Can you talk about your wonderful little three-dimensional woven object?
Yeah, I left
Ducks?
it out of the talk because I knew that I would run out of time, and I just wanted to talk about what was here. But what is a huge part of my artwork is using chisung, which is paper basketry. And so I learned how to turn paper into cords and then weave them into sculptures. And that was a way of making functional objects. And you saw that actually in that slide with that little table, that you could make things that were actually quite strong and actually even waterproof. And so I first learned by making a chamber pot, which is double-walled vessel coated in sticky rice paste and then in multiple layers of lacquer, which you had to get from the sap of the lacquer tree. And that is naturally waterproof and food safe. But then also learned how to make a teapot, teacups, and this was part of like even that quiver that was using that process of essentially the way that I imagine it would have happened is that if you were making books, you have to trim the edges and you get these slips of paper that you would never throw away because garbage is a new invention. Garbage is like a new concept. And so paper was so precious, I'm sure you just start playing with it. And the natural thing you would do with a slip of paper is to twist it. And when you twist it like that, it makes it very, very strong. And so they already had basketry traditions like so many other places in the world. And so they would just apply those techniques. They would just use paper instead. And so what was used in the home was often made out of paper, whereas the same object used outside would be made out of straw. So those paper shoes were made out of paper and worn inside the home, keep your feet warm. Remember, paper is a great insulator. But outside, you'd wear straw shoes. You wouldn't wear paper shoes. But yeah, I wanted to. I usually include the ducks, especially. I had seen an image of a woven duck, and it was related to these wedding traditions of giving these carved wooden ducks to newlyweds, and I wanted to replicate them in paper after seeing this artifact that I knew it had been done, and so that's why I went back to the second time to Korea to learn to do more advanced study with my choosing teacher so that I could learn to do that, and that just kind of took off from there. So you'll have to look at, there are other things all over my website so you could see more images of that, but I didn't want to keep you here all night away from the wonderful food that's behind us. So thank you so much.